Layla sat at the back of the lecture hall, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her desk. She had always hated sitting in the back, but today, she felt an overwhelming need to shrink into the shadows. Harvard University, the institution where she had fought tooth and nail to earn her place, was not the welcoming haven she had imagined. It wasn't the brick buildings or the prestigious professors that she feared. It was the constant feeling that she didn't belong, like she was just a temporary fixture among the rich, the privileged, the elite. Her mind raced back to the day she had gotten the acceptance letter. She had screamed, cried, and hugged her father, who worked as a janitor on this very campus. It had been a dream come true, yet now, with every passing day, that dream seemed more like an illusion. She didn't fit in here, and she could feel it. Her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand as Professor John Bradford, the renowned history professor, strode to the front of the room. He was known for his sharp wit and no-nonsense approach to teaching. He had an air of authority that most students either respected or feared. Layla had seen his lectures before, his brilliant mind and commanding presence. But today was different. Today, something was about to happen that would shake her world to its core. Professor Bradford had a way of turning his lectures into theatrical performances, weaving history with passion and intensity. But today, he seemed distracted. Maybe it was the pressure of the upcoming midterms, or maybe something else entirely. He glanced down at his notes before looking up at the students. Ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing the impact of the working class in the early American industrial era. Now, we all know that many of you come from families with a certain pedigree, he said with a grin, the kind that was supposed to make everyone laugh. Most of the class did, shifting in their seats. But Layla's stomach twisted in discomfort. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, and her breath caught in her chest. Take Layla here, Professor Bradford continued, pointing in her direction. Layla's heart skipped a beat, and the room fell silent. She could feel the eyes of her classmates burning into her skin. Her father is one of the janitors who keeps this prestigious university clean. But I'm sure that doesn't bother her, right, Layla? He raised an eyebrow as if expecting a response. Layla's face turned red, but she kept her head down, staring at her notebook. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She wanted to disappear, to be anywhere but here. The laughter from some of her classmates made it worse. They didn't understand. They never would. The professor's voice continued, but Layla couldn't focus on the words anymore. Instead, she felt the burn of humiliation creeping up her neck. She had worked so hard to get here, to earn a place in this classroom, and yet here she was, being reduced to the daughter of a janitor. It was as if all her achievements, all her sacrifices, didn't matter. To him, she was nothing more than a punchline. Her father had always told her that she could do anything if she worked hard enough. That no matter where she came from, her intellect and determination would be her ticket to success. But how could she succeed when people like Professor Bradford treated her like she was less than human? Her fingers gripped the edge of the desk, her nails digging into the wood. She wanted to say something, to stand up for herself, but the words wouldn't come. It wasn't that she didn't have a voice, it was that she didn't know how to make it heard in a room where everyone else had a megaphone. The lecture continued, but Layla wasn't listening anymore. She had never felt so small, so invisible. The rest of the class passed in a blur, and by the time the bell rang, signaling the end of the lecture, Layla was out of her seat and out the door before anyone could say a word to her. As she walked through the crowded hallways, she tried to push the feelings of anger and frustration out of her mind. She had always prided herself on her resilience, but today, something inside her had broken. How could she continue to fight for a future when the very place she had worked so hard to get to seemed determined to remind her that she didn't belong? Layla's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, hoping for a distraction. It was a message from her father. "How was class, sweetheart? Remember, you're there because you earned it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her heart squeezed at his words. He had always been her biggest supporter, the one person who believed in her when everyone else doubted her. But even his words didn't bring the comfort they once did. She needed more than just words. She needed to prove herself, not just to the world, but to herself. She found herself outside the dormitory, standing under the tall oak tree that had always been her spot when she needed to think. As she looked up at the branches swaying in the wind, she felt the weight of the moment. What was she doing here? Was it worth it? Was Harvard really the place for her? Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the class forum. A post from one of her classmates caught her eye. Did anyone else notice how the janitor's daughter was looking today? Bet she's the first in line to clean up after class. What a joke. Layla's stomach twisted in fury. She had known the whispers were there, but seeing them in writing made it real. The hatred, the judgment, the stereotypes, it was all there, plain as day. For a moment, she felt like giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong here. But then, she remembered her father's words. You're there because you earned it. No one else could take that away from her. Not even Professor Bradford. Not even the anonymous classmates who took pleasure in making her feel like less than she was. With a deep breath, Layla wiped away the tears that had unknowingly slipped down her cheeks. She wouldn't let them win. She wouldn't let the mockery define her. She would rise above it. And when she did, they would have no choice but to see her for who she truly was, someone who would not be silenced. As she walked back to her dorm, she made a promise to herself. The next time someone tried to mock her for who she was, she would not back down. She would speak her truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made others. Because in this world, she would no longer allow anyone to make her feel like she didn't belong. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Layla's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she walked back to her dorm room, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the image of Professor Bradford's smirk, nor the cruel words from her classmates. How could people, especially the ones in positions of power, be so callous? It wasn't the first time she'd been treated like an outsider, but this time, it felt different. It felt like she had been hit in the gut by something she couldn't fight back against. She reached her door and pushed it open, stepping into the small, familiar space she had made her own over the past few months. The dorm was nothing luxurious, just a bed, a desk cluttered with books, and a window that overlooked the campus. But it was hers, a place where she could escape from the harsh world outside. As soon as the door closed behind her, Layla collapsed onto the bed, her head spinning. She pulled the covers up around her, wishing she could disappear into them. Her phone buzzed again, but this time she ignored it. She knew it was probably another message from her father, and while she appreciated his support, the words felt empty right now. It wasn't that she didn't love him, she did more than anything. But his words, no matter how encouraging, couldn't change the reality she was facing. She closed her eyes and let the memories of her past flood her mind. Layla had grown up in a small apartment on the edge of Boston, where she and her father lived just above the poverty line. Her mother had passed away when she was only 5, and since then, it had been just her and her dad, who worked long hours as a janitor at Harvard University. He was the hardest working man she knew, and he had always made sure Layla understood the value of education. Baby girl, you can be anything you want if you keep your head up and work hard. Don't let the world tell you otherwise, he'd often say, his voice filled with both love and determination. His words were her armor, but now, in the face of the cruelty at Harvard, they felt like they might not be enough. Her father never made excuses. He took pride in his work, even though people often overlooked it. It didn't matter to him that people called him the janitor. What mattered was that he did his job with dignity. He would work all day, cleaning classrooms, emptying trash cans, scrubbing floors, and then come home and pour all his energy into helping her with her schoolwork. She remembered long nights at the kitchen table, both of them bent over their textbooks, her father helping her with math problems while barely staying awake. He would never give up on her. But the world outside their little apartment wasn't always kind to people like them. Layla's phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time, she picked it up. It was a message from one of her closest friends at Harvard, Tasha. "Hey girl, I saw what happened in class today. Are you okay? You know you don't have to take that from him, right? We've got your back. Let me know if you want to talk." Layla smiled faintly. Tasha had been one of the few people to welcome her with open arms when she first arrived at Harvard. She was a fellow African-American student, and they had bonded over shared experiences of being in a place that felt like it wasn't designed for people like them. Layla typed back quickly, "I'll be okay. Just need some time to process. Thanks for checking in." As she set the phone down, she thought about Tasha's offer. It was comforting to know that at least one person cared, but the truth was, Layla didn't know how to talk about what had happened. How could she explain the feeling of being belittled in front of an entire class? How could she put into words the deep hurt of being judged by someone who didn't even know her? Layla had always prided herself on being strong. She had to be. Growing up, there was no room for weakness. She couldn't afford to let her circumstances define her. She had to work twice as hard, fight twice as much, just to get the same opportunities that others took for granted. And yet, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how many hours she spent in the library or how many sleepless nights she endured, it sometimes felt like none of it mattered. The world was determined to remind her of her place. As she lay there, staring at the ceiling, Layla's thoughts shifted. She couldn't let herself wallow in self-pity. Her father had raised her better than that. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let one professor, one comment, tear her down. Her mind flashed back to the day she had received her acceptance letter from Harvard. She had been sitting at the kitchen table, her father beside her, when the envelope had arrived. The world outside had been noisy with uncertainty, but in that moment, everything had been still. She could still hear the excitement in her father's voice when he read the letter aloud. "Baby girl, this is your moment. You've earned this. This is your future." And he was right. She had earned it. She wasn't here by mistake. She wasn't just the daughter of a janitor. She was Layla Williams, a bright, capable student with a future ahead of her. No one could take that away. Layla took a deep breath and sat up in bed. She wiped her eyes, which she hadn't realized were wet, and stood up. She wasn't going to let this defeat her. She had to keep going, no matter what. The world might try to push her down, but she would rise. She grabbed her bag, and as she headed toward the door, her phone buzzed once more. It was another message from her father. "Never let anyone make you feel small, Layla. You're a queen. Don't forget that." Layla smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Her father's words were more than just encouragement, they were a reminder that she came from strength. She wasn't just a student at Harvard. She was a woman of purpose, a woman who would not let the world define her. She stepped out of the dorm room, ready to face whatever came next. No matter the obstacles, no matter the ridicule, Layla Williams was determined to prove to everyone, including herself, that she belonged at Harvard. And nothing, not even Professor Bradford, could take that away from her. The next few days after the humiliating lecture passed in a blur. Layla buried herself in her books, determined to not let the bitterness of that moment define her. She avoided the main lecture halls, choosing instead to study in the quieter corners of the library, where the walls felt a little less suffocating. It wasn't that she was afraid to confront her professors or classmates, but something had shifted inside of her. She was no longer the eager freshman who wanted to fit in and please everyone. Now, she had a singular focus, to prove her worth. But no matter how much she tried to lose herself in the pages of her textbooks, the words from Professor Bradford echoed in her mind like a haunting melody that wouldn't stop playing. "The janitor's daughter," his voice seemed to repeat over and over, mocking her every step, every achievement. No amount of studying could erase the sting of his words. Layla tried to push it aside, but the truth was, she couldn't ignore it. Every time she saw a group of students chatting in the cafeteria, laughing, sharing stories of their privileged backgrounds, she felt a pang of loneliness. She couldn't relate. She couldn't talk about summer vacations in the Hamptons or spring break trips to Europe. All she had was the story of a hard-working father who cleaned Harvard's hallways to give her a shot at a better life. It was during one of these quiet, self-reflective moments in the library that Tasha found her. Layla. Tasha's voice cut through the silence, and Layla looked up to see her friend standing at the end of the aisle, a warm smile on her face. Tasha's presence was like a breath of fresh air, full of energy, humor, and no pretense. She had a way of making the world feel a little less heavy, and that was exactly what Layla needed. "Hey, girl," Layla greeted, offering a small smile in return. Tasha walked over, dropping her books onto the table and pulling out a chair. "I've been looking for you. What's up? You've been hiding in here like a ghost." Layla shrugged, trying to brush off the tension. "Just studying. You know, same old stuff." Tasha raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Cut the act, Layla. I saw what happened in class the other day. You've been walking around like someone knocked the wind out of you. You need to talk about it. I can't just let you keep it all inside." Layla sighed, pushing her books aside. "I don't know what to say, Tasha. It's hard. I've worked so hard to get here, and then one professor," she trailed off, not sure how to express the mixture of frustration, anger, and hurt swirling inside of her. "I get it," Tasha said softly. "But you can't let people like him control your narrative. You're not here by accident. You're not just the janitor's daughter. You're Layla Williams. You're here because you've earned it, and no one can take that away from you." Layla looked at her friend, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Tasha's words were comforting, but deep down, Layla knew the truth. There was still a part of her that doubted if she truly belonged here. She had worked so hard, yes, but in this place, she couldn't help but wonder if it would ever be enough. "I just feel like I'm being treated like an outsider," Layla confessed. "Like no matter what I do, I'm always going to be the one who doesn't belong. Like I'm only here because they need a token diversity student or something." Tasha leaned forward, her voice firm. "That's not true, Layla. You're here because you're brilliant. Don't let anyone make you feel less than that. People like Bradford, they're just scared. They're scared of what someone like you represents. You're the future. You're a living testament to the fact that people from all walks of life can change the game." Layla took a deep breath, letting Tasha's words settle in. "It's just hard. Sometimes I don't know if I'm strong enough for all of this. I feel like I'm always fighting to prove myself." Tasha smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Well, maybe it's time for a different kind of fight." Layla looked at her quizzically. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's time for you to make them see you for who you really are. Not the janitor's daughter. Not the diversity hire. But you. Show them that you're more than what they expect, and when they underestimate you, you'll rise above them." Layla felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was the first flicker of hope, the realization that maybe, just maybe, she could take control of this narrative. She didn't have to be the victim. She could be the force that changed the story. The next day, Layla walked into Professor Bradford's class with her head held higher than it had been the day before. She had made up her mind. She wouldn't let him or anyone else define her. She would take back the power that had been stripped from her in that moment of mockery. As she sat down, she couldn't help but notice that a few of the students glanced at her with that same look of quiet judgment. They probably hadn't forgotten what had happened either. It would take more than one day to undo the damage of that comment, but Layla wasn't going to wait for them to come around. Professor Bradford walked in, and the class grew quiet, as it always did when he entered. He didn't immediately look her way, but Layla could feel his gaze lingering on her. He was watching her, waiting to see if she would shrink in the face of his ridicule. But Layla didn't shrink. She sat up straighter and focused on his lecture as if it was just another day, just another class. She would show him that she was more than the sum of his prejudices. As the lecture went on, Professor Bradford made a passing remark about the economic challenges faced by the working class during the Great Depression. It was a topic that Layla had studied extensively for her next paper, and she couldn't resist the urge to speak up. "Actually, Professor, I think you're missing a key factor in how the working class fought for better wages and rights during that time," Layla interjected, her voice steady and confident. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Professor Bradford raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the interruption. "Oh," he said, his tone a mixture of curiosity and slight condescension. "And what, Miss Williams, do you think is missing from my analysis?" Layla stood up, feeling a sense of calm determination wash over her. "It's not just about economics. It's about resilience. It's about how people fought for their dignity, their lives, not just their livelihoods. That's what made the working class so powerful during the Great Depression. It wasn't just about survival. It was about standing up to a system that wanted to keep them down." Her words hung in the air for a moment, and for the first time since that awful lecture, Layla felt like she had control of the room. She wasn't the janitor's daughter anymore. She was Layla Williams, and she wasn't going anywhere. Professor Bradford stood there for a beat, his face unreadable. Then, to Layla's surprise, he nodded. "I see. Well, Miss Williams, I think we could all learn something from your perspective. Let's move on." As the class continued, Layla sank back into her seat, a small smile tugging at her lips. She had done it. She had taken the first step in changing the narrative. And for the first time in a long while, Layla felt like she might just be able to find her place at Harvard after all. The days following Layla's stand in Professor Bradford's class were a mix of nerves and quiet victories. On one hand, she still felt the weight of judgment from her classmates, whispers behind her back, pointed glances when she walked into the room. On the other hand, there was a feeling of empowerment she hadn't expected. Speaking up in class had been a turning point. It wasn't just a defense of her intellect, but a reclaiming of her space in a world that had tried to shrink her down to nothing more than a label. Tasha had been one of the first to notice the shift. When they met up for lunch the following day, Tasha greeted her with a wide smile. "Look at you, girl," she said, raising an eyebrow as she picked at her salad. "I see you out there changing the game." Layla smiled back, grateful for Tasha's support. "I don't know about that. But I'm not gonna let him. Let anyone, just walk all over me anymore. That's the spirit." Tasha leaned in, her voice lowering. "I heard some of the other professors have been talking. People noticed what you did in Bradford's class. Word's getting around." Layla's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of talking are we talking about?" "Nothing bad, I promise." Tasha's eyes twinkled. "Just respect. I think some people are starting to see you for who you really are, Layla. And that's what we need. It's one thing for us to see it, but it's another for the rest of the world to get the message." Layla's mind raced. She hadn't expected her actions to have such an immediate impact. She had just wanted to defend herself, not become some sort of symbol of resistance. But maybe that's what she was now, an example of someone refusing to stay silent, someone demanding respect in a place that didn't always give it freely. After lunch, Layla decided to take a walk through the campus, trying to shake off the restless energy building up inside her. She had made progress, yes, but there was still a long road ahead. She couldn't ignore the fact that the overwhelming majority of students at Harvard came from backgrounds she could never even imagine. Their privilege, their ease, their world was so different from hers, and that reality still hit her like a cold wave every time she stepped into a new classroom. It was a crisp autumn day, and the campus was abuzz with students rushing between buildings, some laughing, others deep in conversation. As she passed the main quad, Layla spotted someone she didn't expect, Professor Caldwell, one of her favorite professors, who taught her sociology class. He was standing by the fountain, chatting with a group of students. When he saw her, his eyes lit up, and he excused himself from the group, walking over to her. "Layla, how are you?" he asked warmly, offering a gentle smile. Professor Caldwell was one of the few faculty members who had always treated Layla with kindness and respect. He wasn't like the others, and she had always appreciated that. "I'm good, Professor. Just, taking things one day at a time," she replied, a little surprised by the encounter. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said, glancing over his shoulder at the group he had just left. "I heard about what happened in Professor Bradford's class. And I just wanted to say, I think you did something very important. Standing up for yourself like that, it took guts." Layla blinked, taken aback. "You heard about that?" Professor Caldwell nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Word travels fast around here, but that's not the point. The point is, I'm proud of you. That's exactly the kind of courage we need in academia, people who aren't afraid to speak the truth, no matter the consequences." His words made Layla's chest tighten, but in the best way possible. She hadn't expected this kind of acknowledgement, certainly not from a professor with his reputation. He was a tenured professor, well respected among his peers, and hearing him say that felt like a validation she hadn't known she was desperate for. "Thank you, Professor. I really appreciate that," she said softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I know this place isn't always easy, especially for students like you," Professor Caldwell continued, his tone growing more serious. "But you've got something powerful inside of you, Layla. Don't let people like Bradford or anyone else dim that light. You belong here, and I want you to know I'm here to support you, no matter what." Layla was caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. She had known that Professor Caldwell was a good teacher, but she hadn't expected him to be such an ally. "Thank you," she said again, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." Professor Caldwell smiled, his eyes glinting with something like pride. "You're welcome. And don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. I'm happy to help with anything, whether it's academic or just someone to talk to." As he turned to walk back to the group of students, Layla felt a surge of gratitude. It wasn't just that he had acknowledged her, he had given her something far more valuable, a sense of validation. He saw her for who she truly was, not as a label or a stereotype, but as an individual with something important to offer. That moment, however brief, would stay with her for a long time. The next few weeks brought more surprises. Layla found herself gaining more confidence, not just in her classes but in the way she carried herself on campus. People seemed to notice her more, and while some of it was still tainted with the subtle undercurrents of judgment, there were others, like Professor Caldwell, who offered a different kind of support. Her relationship with Tasha grew even stronger as well. Tasha had always been a steady source of encouragement, but now she was Layla's sounding board in a way she hadn't been before. The two of them spent late nights in the library, studying for midterms, but also talking about their shared experiences of navigating the complexities of Harvard. Tasha's resilience was contagious, and it pushed Layla to be bolder, to step outside of the box she had placed herself in. One afternoon, as they were walking back to their dorms, Tasha turned to Layla with a mischievous grin on her face. "So, I heard you gave Professor Bradford a run for his money in class last week. What did he say to you after?" Layla rolled her eyes, but there was a smile tugging at her lips. "Nothing much. He just made some vague comment about respecting different perspectives, but I don't think he really gets it." Tasha snorted. "Of course he doesn't. But hey, at least you got under his skin. That's a win in my book." Layla laughed. "Yeah, maybe. But you know what? I think I'm starting to realize that it's not just about him. It's about all of us. We don't have to shrink to make them comfortable. Tasha grinned. Now that's the attitude I'm talking about. Layla felt a lightness she hadn't felt before. Things weren't perfect, and there was still a long way to go before she truly felt like she belonged. But for the first time since arriving at Harvard, she felt like she was on the right path. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting for her place in a world that had tried to tell her she didn't belong. And she was going to keep fighting, no matter the obstacles. The days were getting colder as fall settled in, and with it came the mounting pressure of midterms. But for Layla, the stress of exams was nothing compared to the new weight of expectations that had begun to settle on her shoulders. She had done something bold, something that had earned her a small victory against the system she'd been fighting so hard to fit into. Yet now, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was just beginning. She had thought Professor Bradford would let things slide after her interruption in class, but instead, there seemed to be a subtle shift in the way he interacted with her. He didn't mock her outright anymore, but there was an unmistakable coolness in his demeanor. Every time she spoke in class, his eyes would narrow slightly, his lips pressing into a thin line. It wasn't overt, nothing that could be called out or reported, but it was there, lurking just beneath the surface. Layla had tried to shake it off. After all, she didn't need his approval. She was here to prove something to herself, not to him. But as the days passed, she couldn't ignore the sense that she was walking on eggshells in his presence, waiting for the next subtle jab. It was a Tuesday morning when the storm finally broke. Layla had just returned to her dorm after a grueling study session when she received an email from Professor Bradford. Her stomach sank as she clicked open the message, her eyes scanning the text. Subject: Request for a meeting regarding your participation in class. Dear Miss Williams, I would like to meet with you to discuss your recent comments in class and to ensure we are on the same page moving forward. Please let me know a convenient time for us to meet this week. Regards, Professor Bradford. Layla's pulse quickened as she stared at the screen. The polite tone of the email was at odds with the chill she felt in her bones. It wasn't like Bradford to ask for a meeting unless there was something he wanted to address. She felt a surge of anxiety creep up her spine. She could already guess what it was about. This was it. The fallout she had been expecting. She felt a lump form in her throat as she tapped out a quick reply. Subject: Request for a meeting regarding your participation in class. Dear Professor Bradford, thank you for reaching out. I would be happy to meet at your convenience. How about Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m.? Let me know if that works for you. Best regards, Layla Williams. She clicked send and leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen as the weight of the situation sank in. The sting of his condescending tone from the lecture still fresh in her mind. But now, as much as she tried to avoid it, the reality was setting in, things were about to get more difficult. When Thursday afternoon finally came, Layla's stomach was in knots. She walked to Bradford's office with a sense of dread that made the long hallway feel even more oppressive. It wasn't just that she was nervous about the meeting, she was afraid. Afraid of what he might say. Afraid of what it meant for her future at Harvard. She knocked on the door and waited for his call. Come in. Layla entered, her heart thudding in her chest. Bradford was sitting behind his desk, his expression neutral, almost unreadable. He motioned for her to take a seat. Thank you for meeting with me, Layla said, trying to keep her voice steady. Of course, Professor Bradford replied, his tone cool but not unkind. He didn't waste any time getting to the point. I wanted to address your comments in class last week. Layla nodded, bracing herself. She knew this was coming. I'm glad you're engaging with the material, he continued. But I've noticed that your tone during discussions has become assertive. While I appreciate a good debate, I also want to remind you that respect for authority is important in academic settings. There's a way to disagree without coming across as combative. Layla felt her pulse spike. Was he really saying this to her? Was he seriously accusing her of being combative for speaking up? It took everything in her to stay calm, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I wasn't trying to be combative, Professor. I was just offering a different perspective on the topic. I felt it was important to bring up a more nuanced view on how the working class fought during the Great Depression, that's all. Bradford leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. I understand that. But sometimes, Miss Williams, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And your approach might be perceived as challenging, especially in a class where we expect a certain decorum. Layla bit her lip, trying to keep her emotions in check. She knew this was an old tactic, dismiss her viewpoint because of how she delivered it, not the content of her argument. He was trying to silence her without directly confronting her intelligence. She wasn't going to let him do that. Not again. I'm not here to fight with you, Professor, she said, her voice firm but polite. I'm just here to make sure my voice is heard. I may not always say things the way you expect, but I promise you, I'm not trying to undermine you. I'm just trying to contribute to the conversation. Bradford's gaze softened, just slightly. He sat up straighter, as if considering her words more carefully. There was a pause, a moment where it felt like the world hung in balance. I'll admit, he said, his voice quieter now, that I may have been a bit too quick to judge the way you express yourself. But you must understand that this is a rigorous environment. Harvard isn't just about challenging ideas. It's about learning how to present them in a way that earns respect from your peers and instructors. Layla felt the tension in her shoulders ease just a little, but she wasn't ready to let him off the hook completely. I get that, Professor. But I also think it's important that we challenge the way things have always been done. We can't just keep accepting things as they are because it's the way it's always been. If I don't speak up, how will things ever change? She paused, letting her words sink in. I'm not here to play it safe. I'm here to make a difference. Professor Bradford was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on her. Finally, he spoke. I think you and I both want the same thing, Miss Williams. We want to see the truth uncovered, even if it's uncomfortable. I'll respect that. But let's be clear, you'll need to find a way to balance that drive with the realities of the academic world. It's a fine line, but I believe you can find it. Layla nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. He hadn't agreed with everything she'd said, but for the first time, he hadn't shut her down completely either. You've got a lot of potential, he said, his voice softening. Just don't let your passion become a hindrance. Keep your fire, but temper it with wisdom. Layla stood up, her heart still racing, but now with a feeling of cautious optimism. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you, Professor. As she left the office, the weight that had been pressing on her chest felt a little lighter. Maybe the storm wasn't over, but she had weathered the first wave. And that was something worth celebrating. The autumn days blurred together into a routine: study, classes, work, and the occasional break to catch up with Tasha. Despite her growing sense of self-assurance, Layla still felt the subtle pressure that came from navigating a world that often felt indifferent, if not downright hostile, to her presence. It wasn't just Professor Bradford she had to worry about anymore, it was the environment at large, a system that seemed built to favor people who were already at the top. But for the first time in weeks, she felt as if she had some semblance of control over her destiny. Professor Bradford's acknowledgement, while far from an apology, had given her something she hadn't realized she was craving: validation. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that sometimes, standing up for yourself meant making room for others to do the same. The pressure of midterms was starting to build, but Layla felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would keep pushing forward. No one was going to erase her voice. It was during a late-night study session in the library that she met one of the people who would change everything. She had been sitting in the quiet corner of the library, her textbook spread out before her, trying to power through the mountain of reading she had left. As always, the academic grind felt like a test of endurance, but Layla had become adept at zoning out the surrounding noise and focusing. Still, the silence was occasionally punctuated by muffled conversations or the clacking of keys on nearby laptops. It wasn't until she felt a soft tap on her shoulder that she looked up, startled. A girl in a navy blue hoodie stood before her, holding a book in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. "Layla Williams, right?" she asked with a shy smile. Layla blinked, not recognizing her immediately. "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Aaron," the girl said, settling down into the chair across from Layla. "I'm in Professor Caldwell's sociology class. We talked a little bit about your, debate in Bradford's class. I just wanted to say, I think it was really brave of you to stand up like that." Layla felt a jolt of surprise. "Wait, you were there?" Aaron nodded. "Yeah, I was. I'm not in the same section as you, but I was in the lecture that day. I thought about what you said for days after. The way you pushed back against his assumptions. I respect that." The compliment took Layla off guard, especially coming from someone she didn't know. "Thanks," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "I didn't think anyone actually noticed." "I think a lot of people noticed," Aaron replied. "It's just, I don't think they have the courage to admit it." The whole class kind of went silent after that. Layla's curiosity piqued. "Really?" Aaron's smile was a little wry. "Yeah, it was like you hit a nerve. I'm sure Bradford wasn't thrilled, but honestly, I think some people were thinking what you were thinking. But no one wants to step out of line, you know." Layla nodded, feeling a surge of relief. "Yeah, that's the thing. It's like you're expected to just take things as they are." Aaron leaned in slightly, her voice lowering. "You're right. People here can be kind of complacent. But that doesn't mean they don't see what's going on. I just wanted to say that you're not alone in this. Some of us are watching, and we get it." Layla couldn't help but feel a little warmth in her chest. Aaron was right, there was a silent majority that didn't always speak up, but that didn't mean they were blind to what was happening around them. "I appreciate that," Layla said quietly. I can't stay silent anymore. It's hard, but it's like, if I don't speak up, who will?" Aaron nodded with understanding. "Exactly. But you don't have to do it alone. There are others who want change too. Maybe not in the loudest ways, but we're here. And you've got to keep pushing, even when it feels like no one's listening." Layla looked at her, feeling something unfamiliar stir within her. Hope, maybe. Or the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this place wasn't as alienating as she had thought. "I didn't expect this kind of support," she admitted. "It's been kind of lonely, honestly." "Well, it doesn't have to be," Aaron replied with a smile. "I'm serious about helping however I can. I don't know what's coming for you next, but I know that if you keep pushing, you're going to find more people who are ready to stand by you." Layla smiled back, feeling a sense of solidarity form that she hadn't known she'd been missing. "Thanks, Aaron. That really means a lot." As Aaron gathered her things to leave, Layla was left alone with her thoughts. It was strange to think that just a few weeks ago, she had felt isolated. But now, there was a flicker of something more. It wasn't just about the fight she was waging against a system that didn't seem to want her, she was beginning to see that she was part of a bigger movement, a network of people who were quietly resisting, even when it seemed like the odds were stacked against them. The next few weeks would be tough, midterms loomed large, and the pressure to keep performing at a high level weighed on her. But Layla felt more equipped than ever to face the challenges ahead. She wasn't alone in this. And that made all the difference. The evening before her next big exam, Layla sat in her room, staring at her notes but unable to focus. Her mind kept drifting back to her conversation with Aaron. It wasn't just that she had received validation from one more person, it was the realization that there were people here who understood what she was going through. People who saw her not just as a student, but as someone with something valuable to contribute to the world. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Tasha. Tasha, you ready for the exam tomorrow? I swear, this stuff is going to haunt me in my sleep. Layla smiled at the message, feeling her nerves ease just a little. Layla, I think so. At least I'm not studying alone this time. Thanks for always being there, Tasha. Tasha, always. We've got this. Go show them what you're made of. Layla put her phone down and took a deep breath, a sense of calm settling over her. This wasn't just about the test. It was about everything that had led her here, the struggles, the challenges, and the small victories. She wasn't going to let the pressure crush her. She wasn't going to let anyone define her. The morning of the exam arrived too soon. Layla hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. The weight of the coming test and the lingering thoughts of her conversation with Aaron kept her awake, turning in her bed. But she had prepared as best she could, and she knew she couldn't let her nerves get the best of her. She had spent the past few days cramming, going over the lectures, notes, and textbooks, but as she sat down at her desk and faced the exam paper, everything seemed to blur together. It wasn't the content that overwhelmed her, it was the pressure. The pressure of being watched, of constantly having to prove herself in a system that hadn't been designed with her in mind. Layla took a deep breath, steadied herself, and began. As the hours passed, the once silent exam room filled with the quiet rustling of papers and the sound of pens scratching away at the questions. Layla's focus was steady, but her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had spent years honing her ability to compartmentalize her worries and focus on the task at hand, but today, the questions felt more like an interrogation than an evaluation. It was as though the exam wasn't just testing her knowledge, it was testing her resilience. By the time the bell rang, signaling the end of the exam, Layla felt drained, her mind exhausted. But there was something else, a sense of pride in the way she had handled it. She hadn't let the pressure break her. She had fought through every doubt, every nervous twitch, every fleeting thought that she wasn't enough. Layla gathered her things and left the room, her mind still processing the test, when she bumped into someone unexpectedly. "Hey, Layla," a familiar voice called out. It was Aaron, looking a little out of breath, a smile on her face. Layla stopped and smiled back. "Hey, Aaron. How did it go?" Aaron shrugged. "It's hard to say, but I think I did okay." "You?" Layla thought about it for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I did okay, too. It was a lot harder than I expected, but I pushed through. I guess we'll see how it turns out." "I'm sure you did great," Aaron said, her tone warm. "But I wanted to tell you something." Layla raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" Aaron hesitated for a moment before continuing. "So, I heard something, and I wanted you to hear it from me first. There's been some talk among the faculty, about your incident with Bradford." Layla's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, talk?" Aaron looked around briefly, making sure no one was listening. "I overheard a conversation between two professors in the hallway the other day. They were discussing your participation in Bradford's class, and how they think you're making waves. Some of them were impressed, but there's a group who feels like you're stirring up too much trouble. Some are even questioning if you belong in the program." Layla felt her stomach tighten. She had known that standing up to Bradford wasn't going to be without consequences, but hearing it confirmed in such a direct way made it feel much more real. She pushed back the wave of frustration that was threatening to rise in her chest and forced a calm expression. "That's a lot to take in," Layla said quietly. "But I won't back down. Not now, not ever." Aaron nodded, her eyes serious. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. I think you need to know that you have people who've got your back, more than you realize." Layla's gaze softened. "I appreciate that. Honestly, I'm just trying to make my way through this place. Some days it feels like the more I try to fit in, the more they want to push me out. Erin smiled gently. That's exactly why we need more people like you. You've got something to say, and it matters. Don't let anyone make you feel small. You belong here just as much as anyone else. Layla smiled, a little relieved. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding on to the fear that maybe she didn't belong, until now. Erin's words had reminded her of something she already knew deep down. This fight wasn't just about the grade on her paper or the opinions of a few professors. It was about proving to herself that she was strong enough to stand her ground. Thanks, Erin. I needed to hear that. You're welcome, Erin said, her smile widening. And hey, if you ever want to grab a coffee or vent, just let me know. We could both use a break from all this, right? Layla chuckled, grateful for Erin's offer. That sounds perfect. As they parted ways, Layla felt a renewed sense of determination. There were battles ahead, no doubt. The pressure wasn't going to let up, but neither was she. She had made it this far, and no one was going to take that away from her. The next week brought more challenges, but it also brought unexpected rewards. Her exam results came back, and despite the overwhelming odds she had felt, she scored better than she had expected. The grade wasn't perfect, but it was enough to validate her efforts, to remind her that she was more than capable of succeeding in this environment. Professor Bradford's classroom, however, remained tense. He had yet to directly acknowledge Layla's improvement, and she was beginning to suspect that he never would. But she wasn't looking for validation from him anymore. She had Erin's support, Tasha's encouragement, and most importantly, her own growing confidence. It wasn't just about proving something to the world, it was about proving something to herself. It was on a chilly Thursday afternoon, a few weeks after the exam, that Layla received an email that would change the course of her journey at Harvard. She had just returned from an exhausting study session when she saw it, sitting in her inbox like a ticking clock, a subject line that caught her attention. Subject: Invitation to speak at the Diversity Symposium. Dear Miss Williams, I hope this message finds you well. We would like to formally invite you to speak at the upcoming Diversity Symposium, where we will be discussing issues surrounding race, academic inclusion, and the challenges faced by students of color in higher education. Your recent contributions to the classroom discussions have made an impact, and we believe your voice would be a valuable addition to the symposium. Please let us know if you are available to participate. We would be honored to have you as a speaker. Best regards. Dr. Felicia Andrews. Diversity and Inclusion Office. Layla stared at the email in disbelief. Speak at the symposium. This was what she had worked for. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Her voice mattered. It had been heard. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she typed her response. Subject: Invitation to speak at the Diversity Symposium. Dear Dr. Andrews, thank you so much for the invitation. I am truly honored to be considered as a speaker for the Diversity Symposium. I would be happy to participate and contribute to the important discussions surrounding race and inclusion in higher education. Looking forward to speaking with you soon. Sincerely, Layla Williams. She hit send, her heart racing. This was just the beginning. Layla couldn't believe what she had just done. It wasn't just that she had agreed to speak at the Diversity Symposium, it was the weight of what it meant. This was her chance to stand in front of an audience, to amplify the very message she had been trying to convey since she first stepped onto Harvard's campus. A chance to speak her truth. The email had come as a shock, though in hindsight, perhaps it shouldn't have. Her impassioned moments in class, her pointed rebuttals to Professor Bradford's dismissals, hadn't gone unnoticed. Yet still, receiving the invitation felt like a dream. Her hands trembled as she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, the gravity of the moment settling on her chest. Are you okay? Tasha's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Layla turned to see her friend standing in the doorway of her dorm room, her brows knitted together in concern. "Yeah," Layla said, her voice a little breathless. She glanced at her phone again, as if the email might somehow disappear. "I just got invited to speak at the diversity symposium." Tasha blinked, taking a step closer. "Wait, seriously? That's amazing." Layla nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I still can't believe it." Tasha gave her a teasing grin. "Well, you've been kind of a star lately. I'm honestly surprised they didn't come to you sooner." Layla chuckled, but the weight of the moment was still heavy in her chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. Speaking in front of an entire audience. It feels surreal." Tasha's expression softened. "You're ready, Layla. You've been speaking out every day in that classroom, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. This is just a bigger stage. And you deserve it." Layla sighed, rubbing her forehead. "But what if I mess up? What if I say something that makes them think I don't belong here?" "You've got this. Besides, if anyone's going to speak to that experience, it's you. You've lived it," Tasha said, her voice full of conviction. "People need to hear your story. Don't second-guess yourself now." The reassurance from her best friend warmed Layla's heart, and she gave her a small nod. Tasha was right. This was her moment. She couldn't let self-doubt get in the way now. Over the next few weeks, Layla threw herself into preparing for the symposium. Every spare moment was spent refining her speech, making sure her points were clear, her arguments compelling. But it wasn't just the logistics of speaking that weighed on her, it was the vulnerability of it all. She had to expose parts of herself, parts of her story, that she hadn't fully let anyone in on. As the day of the symposium neared, the anxiety began to grow. Every time she practiced in front of the mirror, she could see how her voice wavered, how her hands shook just slightly as she spoke. The imposter syndrome began to creep in, whispering in her ear that she wasn't good enough to be standing at the front of the room, speaking to people who, in her mind, had it all figured out. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. "Come in," she called, pushing aside her nervous energy for the moment. Erin walked in, carrying a stack of books in her arms. "Hey, I know you're probably drowning in prep right now, but I wanted to check in on you. How are you doing with the speech?" Layla smiled weakly, setting aside the notes she had been working on. "I'm okay, just nervous. Honestly, I've been second-guessing myself a lot. What if I mess up? What if they don't want to hear what I have to say?" Erin set the books down on Layla's desk and sat down across from her. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you've said in class, about how hard it is to feel like you belong in spaces that weren't built for you. And I think that's exactly why people need to hear you speak. You've been fighting for your space here, for your voice to be heard, and that matters." Layla swallowed hard. "But sometimes it feels like I'm just shouting into the void. Like no matter how loud I speak, it's never enough." Erin shook her head, her eyes steady. "That's because you're looking for validation from the wrong people. The ones who matter will hear you, Layla. And even if they don't, your voice is still important." Layla stared at Erin for a long moment, her thoughts a jumble of emotions. But there was something in Erin's voice, something that made her believe she could do this. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to speak her truth. "You're right," Layla said finally, taking a deep breath. "I don't need anyone's approval. I just need to speak the truth I've lived. And if they're listening, then maybe that's enough." Erin smiled, standing up and giving Layla a playful nudge. "Exactly. Now go out there and show them what you're made of. I know you'll crush it." Layla grinned, feeling a little of the nervousness lift off her shoulders. She didn't have to be anyone else. She didn't have to try to fit a mold. She just had to be herself. The day of the symposium arrived all too quickly. Layla stood in front of the large lecture hall, looking at the sea of faces before her. She could see students, professors, and members of the administration. People who had been a part of the system she was so determined to change. But as she took a deep breath and stepped to the podium, she felt something else, a calmness. The crowd fell silent as she approached the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. She was supposed to be nervous. But instead, she felt a strange sense of power. She wasn't just another student here. She was a voice, her voice. "Good afternoon," Layla began, her voice steady. "My name is Layla Williams, and I want to thank you for giving me the space to share my story." Her words echoed in the large room, and for the first time, she felt like people were actually listening. She took another breath, looked up at the crowd, and began. "I wasn't supposed to be here. Not at Harvard. Not in this space. I wasn't supposed to make it this far. And yet, here I am. And it's not because I'm extraordinary. It's because I've had to fight every day for my place here. To be seen. To be heard. To matter." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. She could see the faces of the students, some nodding in recognition, others tense as if they were hearing her for the first time. Layla's voice didn't waver as she continued, "The reality is, for many of us, higher education isn't a level playing field. It's an arena where some of us are expected to fight harder than others just to be acknowledged. And for students like me, students of color, it's a daily battle against a system that wasn't designed for us to succeed." The room remained quiet, everyone listening intently now. She had their attention. "This is what I've learned, it's not enough to just show up. We have to be bold, unapologetic, and determined to carve our own space. We have to challenge the very systems that make us feel invisible, to make them see us, not just as students, but as people who deserve a seat at the table." Layla took another breath, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting eyes with a few professors who had been dismissive of her in the past. For a moment, she felt a flash of doubt, but she pushed it aside. "I may not have all the answers, but I know this, we can't keep quiet. We have to keep pushing. Because our voices, our stories, are worth hearing." Layla finished her speech with a steady hand, a smile pulling at the corners of her lips. The room was silent for a beat before a wave of applause erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine, heartfelt applause. And for the first time, Layla realized that maybe, just maybe, she had found her place here. Layla couldn't believe what had just happened. As the applause echoed in her ears, a rush of emotions swept over her, relief, pride, and, for the first time in a long while, a sense of belonging. She had done it. She had stood in front of a crowd, faced her fears, and spoken her truth. The room hadn't just listened, they had responded. And in that moment, Layla knew she had made an impact. She stepped away from the podium, her legs slightly shaky, but her heart full. She couldn't help but smile as she walked off the stage, her mind still buzzing with the energy of the moment. Erin, Tasha, and a few of her other friends were waiting for her near the back of the room, and as soon as Layla approached, they swarmed around her with wide grins. "You were amazing!" Erin exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug. "I swear, you made that room feel like it was your own." Tasha nodded enthusiastically. "I was holding my breath the whole time. You didn't just speak to them, you spoke for them." Layla felt a warm glow spread through her. "Thank you. I still can't believe it happened like that. I thought I was going to collapse before I even made it through the first sentence." "Well, it sure didn't look like it," Erin teased, her eyes sparkling. "You were confident, you were clear, and most importantly, you were real. And that's what people needed to hear." Layla grinned, feeling the weight she had been carrying for so long lighten with every word of support from her friends. "It feels so good to finally get my story out there. I've been keeping all of this inside for too long." Tasha gave her a playful nudge. "It's about time. I think you've made some serious waves today, Layla." As they talked, more people began to approach Layla, some of her classmates, a few professors she hadn't spoken to before, and even a few administrators. The crowd surrounding her was small at first, but it grew as the minutes passed. Each person had something to say, whether it was praise for her bravery or acknowledgement of the importance of her message. Layla found herself caught in a whirlwind of conversations, some more meaningful than others, but all of them a sign that her voice had been heard. But amid the congratulations, there was one person who caught Layla's attention, a figure in the back of the room who had been watching her intently. It was Dr. Felicia Andrews, the head of the Diversity and Inclusion Office, who had invited Layla to speak in the first place. Layla excused herself from her friends and made her way toward Dr. Andrews, feeling a mix of curiosity and nervousness. Dr. Andrews was a highly respected figure in the university, known for her advocacy work and her commitment to making Harvard a more inclusive place. "Layla," Dr. Andrews said, offering a warm smile as Layla approached. "That was an incredible presentation. I can't tell you how proud I am of you." "Thank you, Dr. Andrews," Layla replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "It means a lot to hear that from you." Dr. Andrews placed a hand on Layla's shoulder, her gaze steady and sincere. "You have a gift, Layla. Your voice carries weight, and I think you've just started to tap into it. This isn't the end for you, it's only the beginning." Layla felt a lump form in her throat at the sincerity in Dr. Andrews' voice. She had been trying so hard to prove herself in a world that didn't seem to care, and to hear such validation, especially from someone as influential as Dr. Andrews, made her feel like all of her struggles had been worth it. "I hope you'll consider joining us for more events like this in the future," Dr. Andrews continued. "We need more students like you, students who aren't afraid to challenge the system, to make noise, and to demand change." Layla nodded, her heart racing. "I'd be honored." Dr. Andrews smiled and patted her shoulder before walking away, leaving Layla standing there in a daze. She was still processing everything, still soaking in the fact that she had just had this conversation, this moment, with someone who believed in her. But as the event came to a close, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the only moment of validation she was going to get. Something had shifted within her, and she knew that she wasn't just a student anymore, she was a voice for change. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Layla's speech at the symposium had sparked conversations across campus. Professors, students, and even staff members came up to her to share their thoughts, their support, and in some cases, their own struggles. It wasn't just her classmates who had taken notice, the faculty, the administration, they were all listening now. Her academic performance also began to improve. After the symposium, something in Layla clicked. She no longer felt as if she had to work twice as hard to prove herself in every class. She was confident. She was focused. And she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. But with this newfound confidence came new challenges. Not everyone was happy with the attention Layla was receiving. She still faced skepticism and resistance, especially from some of the more traditional professors, like Bradford. But now, Layla was ready. She knew how to handle their condescension, how to stand firm without backing down. Her voice was no longer just a whisper in the back of the room, it was a force, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence her. One afternoon, as Layla sat in the library, preparing for an upcoming exam, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Aaron. "Aaron, hey, I just heard something interesting. Bradford is apparently putting together a new study group, and you're one of the names he's considering. Should I be worried?" Faced with tears of joy. Layla laughed aloud, causing a few people nearby to glance up. She quickly typed back. "Layla, should I be worried or should I be preparing to school him again?" Faced with tears of joy. "Aaron, LOL, you've definitely earned it. Let me know if you need backup." Layla smiled as she set her phone down. She wasn't sure whether Bradford had really changed his opinion of her or if this was some sort of twisted opportunity to get under her skin, but either way, she was ready. She had faced worse, and come out on top. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had accomplished so far. The battle wasn't over, but she was no longer fighting alone. She had her friends, her professors, and, most importantly, her own voice to rely on. The ripple she had started at the Diversity Symposium was only getting bigger. And as it spread, Layla knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. The days that followed Layla's speech were a blur of activity. She attended classes, participated in group discussions, and fielded an increasing number of messages from students and faculty alike, all offering praise, encouragement, and, surprisingly, some constructive criticism. But amid the applause and newfound admiration, there was something lingering beneath the surface. A feeling that she couldn't quite shake. It wasn't the usual stress she felt before exams or the anxiety that came from juggling too many responsibilities. It was something deeper. Something more subtle. Layla had become aware of the fact that not everyone who praised her, especially some of the professors, had the best intentions. She could feel the difference between genuine support and the subtle attempts to control or even undermine her progress. One evening, after an intense study session in the library, Layla found herself sitting with her friends, Tasha and Aaron, in the student lounge. The atmosphere was light, filled with the usual chatter of students unwinding after a long day, but Layla couldn't focus. Her mind kept circling back to the strange encounter with Professor Bradford earlier that week. "Layla, are you okay?" Tasha asked, her voice soft, pulling Layla out of her thoughts. "You've been off all night." Layla sighed, leaning back in her chair and rubbing her temples. "I don't know. Something's off." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I had a meeting with Bradford yesterday," Layla said, her voice quiet. "He's been overly friendly lately. He suggested I join his new study group, but the way he said it felt off. Like he was trying to control me or something. He keeps telling me I should be more collaborative and less combative in class." Tasha frowned. "That sounds like him. But you know, I think he's trying to get under your skin. He can't stand that you challenge him." "I think you're right," Layla said, her frustration building. "But it's not just him. It's everyone who's been trying to make me fit into this box they've created for me. I'm just tired of it. Tired of feeling like I have to prove myself." Aaron nodded. "You've already proven yourself, Layla. And you don't need to play by their rules anymore. But you do need to watch out for people who try to act like they're on your side when they're really just trying to manipulate you." Layla took a deep breath, letting her friend's words sink in. They were right. She had worked so hard to get to this point, but now, she was facing a new battle. It wasn't just about proving her worth, it was about maintaining control over her own narrative, her own voice. The next morning, Layla sat in her usual spot in the classroom, preparing for another lecture with Professor Bradford. As the students filtered in and took their seats, Layla couldn't help but notice the subtle way Bradford watched her, like he was waiting for her to slip up. It was almost as if he was hoping she'd falter so he could prove that her place here wasn't earned. Layla could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but she didn't let it shake her. She had been in uncomfortable situations before, and she was stronger than ever now. As the lecture began, Bradford's usual smug tone filled the room. "Now, let's discuss the idea of meritocracy in academia," he began, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Layla. "Some believe that the most deserving individuals should have access to the same opportunities, regardless of their background. But others argue that systemic barriers complicate this idea. Let's hear what you think, Ms. Williams. You've been quite vocal on this issue." Layla's pulse quickened. She knew this was a test, a chance for Bradford to see if she would stay within the boundaries he had set for her. But Layla had no intention of playing his game. "Professor," she said, standing up and meeting his gaze head-on. "Meritocracy is a myth. It assumes that everyone starts from the same place, that everyone has the same opportunities. But we know that's not true. People of color, women, and students from low-income backgrounds are systematically excluded from these so-called opportunities. That's not a level playing field. It's a facade. The room grew silent, and for a moment, Layla wondered if she had pushed too far. But then, she heard a few murmurs of agreement, some nodding heads, and even a couple of students smiling at her boldness. Bradford's lips twitched, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved on to the next student, but Layla knew he hadn't forgotten. The tension between them simmered below the surface, and she could feel it every time their paths crossed. It wasn't just about ideas anymore, it was about power. As the week progressed, Layla found herself caught in a series of subtle confrontations. Bradford wasn't the only one who seemed to be trying to pull her into a box. Other professors, more covertly, tried to push her to conform to their expectations. They asked her to tone down her rhetoric, to be more polished, to make sure her points weren't too radical. But it wasn't just her professors. Even some of her peers seemed uncomfortable with her growing confidence. During study group sessions, she could sense the unease in the room when she raised her hand to offer a different perspective. Some students avoided her, while others gave her looks that felt like silent judgment. The tension was palpable. One afternoon, Layla was walking to the library when she ran into Dr. Andrews again. The older woman gave her a warm smile, but Layla could see the concern in her eyes. "Layla," she said, her voice low, "I know you've been making waves here, and that's exactly what this institution needs. But you need to be careful." Layla's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Dr. Andrews hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "There are forces here, powerful forces, that don't like being challenged. And they will try to silence you if they can. They won't do it outright. It'll be subtle. You'll start to notice things, your grades being scrutinized more closely, your projects being rejected for arbitrary reasons. They'll try to isolate you." Layla felt a chill run down her spine. She had been sensing it, this quiet resistance. But hearing it confirmed made her stomach turn. Still, she couldn't back down now. "I won't let them control me," Layla said firmly, her voice full of conviction. "I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Andrews nodded, her expression softening. "I know you won't. But just remember, there's strength in numbers. Find your allies, Layla. Hold on to them. You don't have to do this alone." Layla didn't say anything more, but as she walked away, her thoughts raced. She had already come so far, but the road ahead was going to be even harder. It wasn't just about making a difference in the classroom anymore, it was about protecting the voice that had finally been heard. She wasn't going to let them silence her. Not now. Not ever. Layla couldn't shake the feeling that things had begun to shift at Harvard. After Dr. Andrews' warning, she was more attuned to the subtle undercurrents of opposition that she had only vaguely sensed before. She noticed the slight hesitations when she entered a room, the way some professors would glance at each other before addressing her, the whispered conversations that seemed to die down when she walked past. It wasn't blatant, but it was there, quiet, pervasive, and undeniably unsettling. Despite the growing sense of tension, Layla pressed on. She continued to engage in class discussions with the same passion and conviction that had earned her respect, but now, there was an edge to her words. It wasn't just about the content of her arguments anymore, it was about her very presence. She had become a symbol, whether she wanted to or not, of resistance to a system that hadn't fully accepted her. But the truth was, the more she fought, the more isolated she felt. Her friends, especially Tasha and Aaron, were supportive, but they had their own battles to fight. Tasha was busy with her own research project, and Aaron had become increasingly involved in a student-led initiative advocating for mental health resources on campus. Both of them were still Layla's closest allies, but they had their own commitments, and as Layla spent more time focusing on her classes and her speechwriting, the connection with her friends began to feel strained. One afternoon, Layla found herself sitting alone in the student lounge, her laptop open in front of her as she worked on a paper for Bradford's class. She'd been at it for hours, but the words weren't coming. Her mind kept drifting back to her recent interactions with him. Bradford's smirk during her last lecture, the way he had dismissed her arguments without even truly listening, was still fresh in her mind. She felt herself growing tired, not just physically, but emotionally. It was one thing to fight for change, but it was another to constantly feel like the target. She had stood up for herself, and for others, but every time she did, it seemed like the forces working against her just got stronger. A voice broke her from her thoughts. "Hey, Layla. Mind if I sit here?" Layla looked up, startled to see Professor Howard standing in front of her. He was a young professor in the sociology department who had been known for his progressive views and support of marginalized students. Layla had met him a few times before, but they hadn't spoken much. Still, there was something comforting about his presence. He wasn't like the others. He didn't judge her based on her background or appearance. "Of course, Professor Howard," Layla said, motioning to the empty chair across from her. "Please, sit." Howard smiled and took a seat, looking at the laptop screen for a moment before meeting her gaze. "I've been meaning to ask you how things are going. I know it's been a rough semester, and I wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" Layla hesitated. She wasn't used to professors being so personal with her, but something about Howard's genuine concern made her want to open up. "I don't know," Layla said quietly, leaning back in her chair. "It's like, every time I feel like I'm making progress, something pushes me 2 steps back. I feel like I'm always on the defensive. There's so much pressure to conform to this ideal of what a Harvard student should be, but it's not me. And it's like they don't want to hear my truth." Howard nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I know exactly what you mean. It's a fight for space, for visibility. And it's exhausting. But you're not alone, Layla. You've got people here who see you, who appreciate your voice. It might not always feel that way, but you're making a difference." Layla smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes I wonder if it's even worth it. If I'm just spinning my wheels." Howard leaned forward slightly, his voice serious. "Let me tell you something. People like you, people who challenge the status quo, are the reason this institution evolves. You might not see the changes now, but trust me, they're happening. Change is slow, and it's painful, but it's real. And the fact that you're here, that you're speaking up, that's something that's going to ripple out." Layla nodded, but the weight of his words didn't completely lift the burden she felt. She had fought so hard to be here, to make a name for herself, but it still didn't feel like enough. It wasn't enough to simply be seen, she needed to be heard. And right now, it seemed like her voice was the only thing in the room that nobody wanted to listen to. The next few days were a blur of deadlines, meetings, and quiet moments of reflection. Layla spent more and more time in the library, away from the prying eyes of her peers and professors. It was a place where she could think clearly, where the world felt a little less overwhelming. She could shut everything out and focus on her work, on the things that mattered to her most. It was during one of these solitary study sessions that Layla received a message that would change the course of her semester. The message was from Dr. Felicia Andrews. "Dr. Andrews, Layla, I need to talk to you. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" Layla's heart skipped a beat. She had seen Dr. Andrews a few times in passing, but they hadn't had a private conversation since the symposium. What could this be about? She quickly typed a response. "Layla, of course, Dr. Andrews. I'll be there." The next morning, Layla found herself walking through the familiar halls of the Diversity and Inclusion Office, feeling both nervous and excited. Dr. Andrews was one of the few professors who had consistently supported her throughout her time at Harvard, and Layla had come to value her mentorship. When she entered Dr. Andrews' office, the older woman was sitting behind her desk, a folder in front of her. She looked up and gave Layla a warm smile, but there was a certain gravity to her demeanor that immediately made Layla uneasy. "Layla," Dr. Andrews said, motioning for her to sit. "I'm glad you could come. I've been following your work closely, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've made quite an impact on campus." Layla smiled nervously, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "Thank you. I've been trying to make a difference, but it's been harder than I expected." Dr. Andrews nodded thoughtfully. "I know. But that's why I'm here. I've been speaking with some of the administration about your situation. We've been working on a few initiatives to ensure that voices like yours are amplified, not just on campus, but within the broader academic community." Layla's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dr. Andrews said carefully, "that we've been working on a proposal to give you a platform, an official one. A chance to represent not just yourself, but the students who feel like their voices are being ignored. We're trying to make sure that your voice doesn't just fade into the background. It's time for a bigger stage." Layla felt her heart race. "But, how? What kind of platform?" Dr. Andrews smiled. "You'll find out soon enough. But for now, I need you to trust me. This is just the beginning." Layla didn't know what was happening, but she could feel it in her bones. Her fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Layla spent the following days in a whirlwind of mixed emotions. Dr. Andrews' promise of a platform to amplify her voice had ignited a sense of hope in her that she hadn't felt in a while. But that hope was tempered by a gnawing sense of fear. She knew that stepping into the light meant becoming a target. The question wasn't if she'd face resistance, but how much and how soon. Despite the uncertainty, Layla couldn't ignore the pull to push forward. Her work, her arguments, her very existence at Harvard represented something bigger than just her own ambition. She was a symbol, a living example of what it meant to challenge the status quo and demand a seat at the table. And now, it seemed that the university was finally recognizing that. At least, that's what she hoped. But as her anticipation grew, so did the subtle resistance. In the classroom, Bradford's presence became more oppressive. He seemed to go out of his way to challenge her in discussions, questioning her arguments with an intensity that he hadn't shown toward anyone else. Other students, too, began to distance themselves. Some whispered behind her back, others gave her strange, appraising looks, but very few offered any kind of camaraderie. It was a Thursday afternoon when Layla finally received the official email. It came with the subject line, "Platform Proposal Approval." Her hands trembled as she clicked it open, reading the contents of the message with a mixture of disbelief and growing excitement. Subject, Platform Proposal Approval. Dear Layla Williams, I am pleased to inform you that your proposal has been approved by the Diversity and Inclusion Board. You have been selected to lead a new initiative aimed at amplifying student voices from historically underrepresented communities within the academic space. We believe your unique perspective will be invaluable in spearheading this project, and we are excited about the work you will do. The platform will include speaking engagements, roundtable discussions with faculty and administration, and workshops that foster dialogue around issues of race, class, and gender in academia. Your first official event will take place in 2 weeks, where you will present your vision for the future of student advocacy at Harvard. A formal announcement will be made soon, and we will work closely with you to ensure the event is a success. Once again, congratulations. We look forward to your leadership. Sincerely, Dr. Felicia Andrews, Director, Diversity and Inclusion. Layla read the email over and over, her heart racing faster each time. This was it. The moment she had been fighting for. She was going to have the platform she had dreamed of, the chance to speak not just for herself, but for so many others who had been marginalized. She knew this was more than a project, this was a turning point. But as the excitement swirled inside her, so did the doubts. What if they were setting her up to fail? What if, despite everything, the system was simply offering her a stage to make her look like a token, an example of diversity that could be pointed to as a success story, while the structures that oppressed students like her remained unchanged? The nagging thought refused to leave her mind, and for the first time in a long while, Layla felt the weight of the challenge ahead. The next few days passed quickly, with Layla preparing for her first official event as a spokesperson for the university's new student advocacy platform. She was given the task of organizing a roundtable with a select group of students, professors, and administration members. The topic: Race and Opportunity in Academia. Layla had been given a team to help with the logistics, helpful, but for the most part, she felt alone in her mission. The other members of the team seemed like well-meaning but disinterested faces, more focused on their own priorities than the cause. It felt as though her fight wasn't truly their fight. As she pored over her notes late one night in the library, preparing for the event, Layla's phone buzzed. It was a message from Tasha. "Tasha, hey Layla, are you okay? I've been hearing some whispers around campus. Some of the faculty is upset about you leading this new initiative. They think it's just a distraction and not real change." Layla's stomach tightened. Of course, there would be backlash. The more she thought about it, the more the whispers made sense. This wasn't just about advocating for change. It was about breaking down barriers that had been in place for centuries. Of course, the people benefiting from that system would be upset. "Layla, I'm okay, just a little overwhelmed. Thanks for checking in though. It's starting to feel real now, but the resistance is growing too. Tasha, don't let them get to you. You've earned this. But if you need anything, you know I'm here." Layla smiled faintly, grateful for Tasha's support. It was moments like this that reminded her of the people who truly understood her, who had always been there when she needed them. The next day, the roundtable arrived faster than Layla anticipated. She stood at the front of a packed conference room, her heart racing as she looked out at the sea of faces, students, professors, administrators, all gathered to hear what she had to say. Her first instinct was to retreat into herself, to shrink down and stay quiet. But she couldn't. Not now. Not after everything she had fought for. As the event began, Layla spoke from her heart. She talked about her own experiences as a black woman in academia, about the doors that had been closed to her, and about the system that had kept students like her out. She talked about how, despite the rhetoric of inclusion, Harvard still struggled with genuine diversity. She called out the culture of silence that allowed systemic racism to fester. And as she spoke, the room grew still, the audience hanging on every word. But not everyone in the room was listening in the way she hoped. Professor Bradford sat in the back, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Every time Layla made a strong point, she caught him glancing at his notes, scribbling something down with a dismissive look. His presence was suffocating, but Layla refused to let it affect her. When the roundtable discussion began, Layla knew this was where things would get complicated. Administrators asked her questions that seemed designed to make her backtrack. Some faculty members tried to undermine her by suggesting that her views were too radical, too divisive. And Bradford, true to form, challenged her at every turn, trying to poke holes in her arguments. But Layla held firm. She stood her ground and responded with the same fire that had driven her all along. She wasn't going to let them control the narrative. She wasn't going to let them make her the exception to the rule. If anything, this was only the beginning. By the end of the event, Layla was exhausted, but she felt a surge of pride. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward changing not just her own future, but the future of students like her at Harvard. But as she left the conference room, Layla knew that this was just the beginning. She had fought for her voice to be heard, but now, she would have to fight to make sure it wasn't silenced. Layla barely slept the night after the roundtable. Her mind replayed the conversations, the questions, the looks of skepticism from some of the faculty members. The weight of what she had just done pressed down on her like a physical force. She had stood up for what she believed in, but now the consequences of her actions were starting to unfold. The next morning, as Layla made her way to the library to catch up on some of her reading, she was stopped by Tasha, who was waiting by the entrance. Her face was serious, and Layla immediately sensed that something was wrong. "What's up?" Layla asked, raising an eyebrow. Tasha hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I've been hearing rumors, Layla. From some of the students, and professors. There's been a lot of talk about your initiative. Some are saying you're causing unnecessary division. Others are questioning whether you even belong at Harvard in the first place." Layla felt a pang in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I knew there'd be backlash. It's part of the process. I can handle it." Tasha shook her head. "It's not just whispers anymore, Layla. Some of the faculty are actively pushing against you. There's talk about rescinding your platform. And some of the students, especially those in the elite circles, are making it clear they don't support you." Layla's stomach twisted. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it from Tasha made it feel all too real. She had become a target, a symbol of everything the old guard wanted to keep intact. The moment she had spoken up, she had crossed a line. "Did you hear from Dr. Andrews?" Layla asked, trying to steady her breathing. Tasha shook her head. "Not yet. But I'm worried, Layla. You're not going to back down, are you?" Layla looked at her friend, her resolve hardening. "No. I'm not going to back down. This fight is too important. I can't let them intimidate me." Tasha nodded slowly, but there was concern in her eyes. "I just want you to be careful. I know how much this means to you, but don't let them drag you down." Layla didn't reply immediately. She appreciated Tasha's concern, but in that moment, the fight felt more necessary than ever. If they wanted to silence her, they were going to have to do more than just whisper. The next week, things only grew more intense. Layla received an email from the Diversity and Inclusion Office asking her to meet with Dr. Andrews. It was an invitation that carried both hope and dread. Had the backlash reached them? Was her platform on the verge of being revoked? Layla arrived at Dr. Andrews' office with her heart pounding in her chest. The door was slightly ajar, and she knocked before stepping inside. "Layla," Dr. Andrews greeted her with a warm smile, but there was something in her eyes that suggested this meeting wasn't going to be all good news. "Come in, take a seat." Layla did as instructed, sitting across from Dr. Andrews, who folded her hands on the desk and leaned forward slightly. "I've been following what's been happening on campus," Dr. Andrews began, her voice measured. "And I wanted to talk to you about some of the concerns that have been raised." Layla's stomach dropped. "Concerns?" "Yes," Dr. Andrews said, pausing. "There's been some pushback from faculty members. Some are questioning whether your platform is dividing the student body, making things more polarized. Others are worried about the way you framed certain issues in your speeches and public statements." Layla clenched her fists in her lap, trying to keep her voice steady. "So, what does that mean? Are you saying I'm in danger of losing the platform?" Dr. Andrews hesitated, then let out a slow breath. "No, not yet. But I need to be honest with you, Layla. The administration is under pressure. There are some powerful voices who want to see this initiative fade away. They feel threatened by it." Layla felt the familiar fire building inside her, but she forced herself to stay composed. "So, what can we do? What's the next step?" Dr. Andrews looked at her thoughtfully. "You're at a crossroads now. The question is whether you can shift the conversation and bring people who are on the fence to your side. There are ways to make your message more palatable, more unifying. But I need to be clear, this is going to take more than just passion. You're going to need to make compromises, maybe tone down some of your rhetoric to avoid alienating potential allies." Layla's mind was racing. Compromises? Tone down her message. Wasn't that the whole point of what she had been fighting for, to speak truth to power, no matter how uncomfortable it was? I don't know if I can do that, Layla said softly, her voice tinged with frustration. If I water down what I believe in, then what's the point? Dr. Andrews regarded her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, Layla, I'm not saying you should abandon your principles. What I'm saying is that there's a balance to be found. You've already made a huge impact. Now it's about ensuring that the doors you've opened don't close before you've had a chance to walk through them. Layla stood up, her heart racing. She had come here looking for answers, but now all she felt was more confusion. I need time to think about this, she said, her voice tight. Dr. Andrews nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. But remember, this is your fight. It's your voice that's going to make the difference. As Layla left Dr. Andrews' office, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. Could she compromise? Should she compromise? She had always believed in being true to herself, in standing firm in the face of adversity. But now, for the first time, she wondered if that was enough. Could she still be effective if she compromised who she was? The next few days felt like a blur. Layla spent every spare moment in the library or in her dorm, trying to sort through her thoughts. She pored over books, articles, and speeches from activists who had fought similar battles in the past. She tried to find a balance between speaking her truth and being strategic. But no matter how much she read, one thing was clear, she couldn't silence herself. Not now. Not after everything. The meeting with Dr. Andrews had planted a seed of doubt in her mind, but the truth was, Layla knew she couldn't let fear dictate her path. The fight wasn't just about her platform, it was about a larger movement. A movement that needed her voice, raw and unapologetic. As the days passed, Layla made a decision. She wasn't going to back down, no matter how hard the road ahead seemed. She would continue to speak out, even if it meant facing more resistance. She couldn't compromise the message, she couldn't compromise who she was, for anyone. She was ready to face whatever came next. Layla's resolve only grew stronger in the days following her meeting with Dr. Andrews. But as much as she told herself that she couldn't compromise her voice, she couldn't deny the growing sense of pressure around her. Everywhere she went, the whispers seemed to follow. She passed by a group of students who quickly hushed when she walked into the room. Faculty members who used to smile at her in the hallways now looked away. It wasn't subtle anymore. The resistance was real, and it was beginning to take a toll. Her phone buzzed late one afternoon, and Layla glanced at it, already knowing who it was. It was Tasha, sending a message as usual, checking in. Tasha, are you okay? I heard from a few people that your platform proposal is on the brink of being shut down. Please tell me it's not true. Layla took a deep breath, staring at the message before typing a response. Layla, I'm fine. I just met with Dr. Andrews. She told me things are getting intense. They're under pressure from some of the faculty to pull back, but I'm not going anywhere. Tasha's reply came quickly, but it was more worried than encouraging. Tasha, you're so strong, but be careful, Layla. They're not just going to let you walk away from this. If they get what they want, it's not just your platform that will be gone. It'll be everything you've worked for. Layla felt the words hit her like a ton of bricks. She knew it. This wasn't just about the platform anymore. This was about a fight for space. A fight for visibility, respect, and the right to be heard, especially in a place like Harvard, where centuries of history had created an environment that was still overwhelmingly white and elitist. But Tasha was right, if this failed, if they managed to push her back into the shadows, it would mean that all those students like her. Students who were desperate for change, who felt out of place and forgotten, would be silenced too. The stakes had never been higher. And yet, despite everything, Layla couldn't back down. She had no choice but to move forward, no matter the consequences. The following morning, Layla walked to campus with a heavy heart. The day ahead promised more meetings, more discussions with faculty, and another round of passive-aggressive comments from those who didn't want to hear her truth. But there was also something else stirring within her. She had decided, she would no longer wait for approval or permission from those who doubted her. As she entered the lecture hall for her History of Race and Politics class, she spotted Professor Bradford at the front, talking to a few students. When he saw her, his expression hardened, as if he were preparing for a battle. Layla hesitated, but then, she walked toward the group. The moment her eyes met his, she could feel the tension in the room shift. "Good morning, Professor Bradford," Layla said, forcing herself to smile, though it felt stiff on her face. "Good morning, Miss Williams," he replied, his tone cool and dismissive. "I trust you're preparing for the upcoming seminar." "I am," she said, standing a little taller. "But I wanted to talk to you for a moment." "About the platform." Bradford raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting her to bring it up so directly. "What about it?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Layla took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her anymore. "I know you've been speaking against it. I know you've been trying to rally support to shut it down. But I want to tell you something. I'm not going anywhere." Bradford's eyes narrowed. "I see. And you think this platform of yours is going to change anything?" "I don't just think it will," Layla said firmly. "I know it will. It's not about me, it's about creating space for voices that have been ignored for far too long. The system at Harvard is built to keep people like me at the margins. But I'm not staying on the margins anymore." For a moment, Bradford was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, he spoke, his words carrying the weight of years of privilege. "Miss Williams, you have a lot of courage, I'll give you that. But you should know, when you push against the system pushes back." Layla met his gaze head-on, unflinching. "I'm ready for that. I've been ready for a long time." Bradford's lips tightened into a thin line, and he didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Layla standing there, feeling a rush of empowerment. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a moment of clarity. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was walking on eggshells. She was fighting for something much bigger than herself, and if Bradford or anyone else didn't like it, so be it. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and discussions. Layla spent hours preparing her next big move, an all-campus rally where she planned to address the concerns of both students and faculty directly. It would be her chance to not only defend her platform but to push back against those who were trying to discredit her. But as she sat in her dorm room that night, finalizing her notes, a knock on her door interrupted her concentration. She opened it to find Tasha standing there, her face a mix of excitement and concern. "I think we need to talk," Tasha said, stepping inside. "What's up?" Layla asked, confused by the urgency in her friend's voice. Tasha took a deep breath. "Layla, I've heard something. You need to know that there's a meeting tomorrow, a closed-door meeting with some of the higher-ups in the administration. They're discussing your platform, and I'm afraid they might be making a final decision." Layla's heart skipped a beat. "What are they planning to do?" "I don't know for sure," Tasha said. "But the word is, if they can't find a way to justify your platform, they'll shut it down. They're trying to make it look like the initiative isn't working." Layla's thoughts raced. She couldn't afford to let this happen. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much. This wasn't just a project. It was her legacy, and it was tied to the future of so many students who had no voice. "I'm not going to let them do this," Layla said, determination filling her voice. "I'm going to the meeting tomorrow. I'll make them hear me." Tasha looked at her with a mix of admiration and worry. "You're going to fight for this, aren't you?" Layla nodded, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead but also the strength within her. I have to. This is bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us. As Tasha left, Layla sat back in her chair, steeling herself for what was to come. Tomorrow would be the day that everything changed. Whether for better or worse, she was about to face her biggest test yet. Layla woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency in her chest. Today was the day she'd been dreading and anticipating for weeks. The closed-door meeting with the administration was scheduled for noon, and she knew that if she didn't do something to sway them, the platform, and the movement could be over. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. Her usual confidence felt a little shaken, but she was resolute. There was no turning back now. She had worked too hard to get to this point, and she had to stay true to everything she believed in. There were too many people counting on her. The campus was quieter than usual as she made her way to the administrative building. The world felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Every step she took felt heavier, as though the pressure of the situation was pushing down on her shoulders. As she reached the building, she spotted Dr. Andrews standing outside the entrance. Her face was tense, but she gave Layla a quick nod when she saw her approach. "You ready?" Dr. Andrews asked, her voice low. Layla took a deep breath. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I'm as ready as I can be." Dr. Andrews offered a small smile of encouragement, but it was clear that even she was anxious. "You've made a lot of people think, Layla. And that's exactly what you needed to do. Just remember, this isn't about them shutting you down. This is about showing them that your voice matters." Layla nodded, though the weight of the moment was nearly suffocating. She had no idea how this meeting would go. She could already feel the tension in her gut, like an electric current running through her veins. There was no way of predicting what might happen next, but she couldn't afford to show any signs of weakness. This wasn't just about her, this was about every student who felt silenced, overlooked, and unheard. Inside the room, the atmosphere was tense. A long wooden table stretched out in front of her, and at least a dozen members of the administration, as well as several faculty members, were seated around it. At the head of the table was Dean Sullivan, a tall man with a stern expression. He had always been one of the quieter voices on campus, preferring to let the more outspoken professors take the lead. But today, his eyes locked on Layla with an intensity that made her heart race. "Ms. Williams," he began, his voice booming across the room. "You've made quite an impact on this campus. We've all been hearing about your platform. And while we appreciate your initiative, there are concerns that we need to address." Layla kept her back straight, her hands resting on the table in front of her. "I understand that. But I also know this platform is important. It's important for students of color who have felt marginalized at this university for far too long." Dean Sullivan exchanged glances with a few of the other administrators. "Yes, but the question remains, has this initiative truly benefited the university as a whole? Or has it created more division among the students?" Layla's heart thudded loudly in her chest. She wasn't sure how to answer that, at least not the way they wanted her to answer. She could feel the eyes of the faculty members bearing down on her, waiting for her to slip up, to say something they could use against her. But she couldn't afford to let them win. Not now. "Division?" Layla repeated, her voice steady despite the fear that bubbled up in her. "It's not about division. It's about visibility. It's about creating a space for students who have been silenced and ignored. We've been asking for representation for years, and it's about time the university took notice." Dean Sullivan opened his mouth, clearly prepared to argue further, but Layla held up her hand. "Before you say anything, let me make something clear," she continued. "This isn't about creating chaos or division. It's about equity. It's about the fact that people like me, students of color, working-class students, are pushed to the edges of this campus. We're told to assimilate, to conform to a culture that's not ours. The platform is just the first step in making sure that we're finally seen and heard. I won't let you erase that." The room was silent. It was as if Layla had thrown down a gauntlet, daring anyone to challenge her. She didn't know if it was the right move, but she had to stand firm. She wasn't going to let them paint her as an agitator or a troublemaker. She was fighting for something far more important. Dr. Andrews spoke up from the back of the room. "If I may, Dean, I think it's crucial to point out that Layla's platform has already sparked necessary conversations. And while not everyone agrees with it, that's exactly the point. It's making people uncomfortable. And discomfort is often the first step toward change." Layla turned to Dr. Andrews, grateful for her support. Her presence gave Layla the courage to continue. "It's easy to maintain the status quo when you're at the top of the hierarchy. But when you're at the bottom, when you're the one being ignored, it's exhausting," Layla said, her voice growing stronger. "You want me to compromise, to tone down my message. But my message is not something I can water down. This is my truth, and it's a truth that's shared by so many others. This university was built on the backs of people like me. I'm here to make sure we're no longer invisible." There was a long pause. Layla could see that some of the faculty members were beginning to nod slightly, as though considering her words. She could feel the shift in the room, an acknowledgement that maybe they hadn't been seeing the full picture. But Dean Sullivan wasn't ready to concede. "Your passion is admirable, Ms. Williams," he said, his tone softer than it had been at the beginning of the meeting. "But passion alone isn't enough to move this university forward. We need solutions, not protests." Layla stood taller, looking directly at him. "The solution is simple: give us a space at the table. Include us in the conversation. If you don't, then the problem isn't with the students. It's with the system that's been built to keep us out." The room was silent again. Layla could hear the soft shuffle of papers, the rustling of uncomfortable chairs. Then, slowly, Dean Sullivan nodded. It was subtle, but it was there. He was conceding something that would change everything. "We'll need time to discuss this further," he said, his voice quieter. "But we'll take your words into consideration, Ms. Williams." Layla didn't know if that meant victory, but it meant something. She had been heard. As she walked out of the meeting room, Layla felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. She had stood her ground. She hadn't let them silence her. And maybe, just maybe, she had made a difference. Tasha was waiting outside the door, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Did it work?" she asked, breathless. Layla met her gaze, her chest swelling with pride. "I don't know yet, but I think they're finally listening." And for the first time in weeks, Layla felt like she might just be on the verge of something monumental. The following days felt like an eternity to Layla. She had given her all in the meeting, and now she could only wait. The university was known for its bureaucracy, and decision-making, especially something as monumental as this, rarely happened overnight. But the uncertainty gnawed at her. Layla spent the next few days avoiding most of her usual campus routine. Her phone was silent more often than not, and when it did buzz, it was rarely with good news. The press had caught wind of the controversy, and now, every major news outlet seemed to want a piece of her story. The emails piled up, interview requests, student petitions, messages of support, and, surprisingly, a few threats. But it was the silent rejection from some faculty members that weighed the most. Despite all the media frenzy, Layla tried to keep herself grounded. She attended her classes, although it was becoming harder to concentrate. Her professors gave her wary looks when she entered the room, and students who had once been friends now avoided her gaze. The pressure was building, but she couldn't back down. She had come too far. By the third day, she received an email from Dr. Andrews, telling her that a decision would be made within the next 48 hours. "The administration is not taking this lightly," the email read. "They're discussing the implications of your platform, and you've made quite an impression, whether positive or negative. Stay strong." That night, she sat in her dorm room, staring at the message, unsure of what to feel. The waiting game was by far the hardest part. In her mind, the question constantly ran through her head: would they shut her down, or would they embrace the change she had fought for? The next morning, Layla stood in front of the campus mirror, adjusting the collar of her jacket. The weather had turned chilly, and she had dressed in layers to shield herself from the cold, but it wasn't the temperature that made her shiver. It was the fear of the unknown. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face the next chapter, whatever it might be. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. The notification was from Tasha. "Tasha, have you heard? They're meeting again today. The decision is coming soon." Layla's stomach dropped. She wasn't prepared for the finality of this moment. She had been ready for weeks, but now that it was here, doubt crept in. What if everything she had fought for collapsed? What if all of it was in vain? Just then, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Dr. Andrews standing there, a serious look on her face. "We need to talk," Dr. Andrews said. Layla's heart raced, the tension in the air palpable. "What's going on?" Layla asked. Dr. Andrews hesitated before stepping inside. "I've been hearing rumors, and I don't want you to panic, but it's not looking good. I'm hearing they may choose to suspend your platform temporarily. They're saying it's too divisive, that it's creating a rift on campus." Layla's breath caught in her throat. Her worst fears were being realized, right before her eyes. "What does that mean for me?" she asked, the words barely escaping her lips. Dr. Andrews sighed, clearly frustrated. "It means that they'll likely push you into a corner, try to force you to back down. They'll say it's for the good of the university. But it's really about control. They don't want to let go of their power." Layla stood still, her mind racing. "So, what should I do?" "You do what you've been doing all along, fight," Dr. Andrews said. "But you need to be strategic. Don't give them an easy out. If you back down now, you'll lose everything. This isn't just about the platform, it's about proving that students like you have a place at this university. Don't let them erase you." Layla nodded, feeling a fire light up inside her. Dr. Andrews was right. She couldn't just give up now. But how could she keep going when the whole system seemed so stacked against her? The next day, Layla stood outside the administration building, her heart pounding in her chest. The final decision was to be made, and everyone knew it. Students were gathering around her, offering silent support. Some were her friends, others were strangers, people who had heard of her cause and believed in what she was doing. Layla stepped up to the podium in front of a small crowd of students, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the microphone. The sound of footsteps echoed in the building behind her, and she knew the moment had arrived. Faculty members and administrators were walking toward the conference room, ready to hear the verdict. The moment of truth. "Today is a day of reckoning for this university," Layla began, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "We are here because we are asking for something simple, a voice. A space to exist without apology. For years, we've been ignored, pushed to the margins. But no longer. The platform isn't just a platform, it's a declaration. We are here, and we are not leaving." The students around her clapped, the energy rising. Layla could feel the energy shift in the air, a palpable sense of unity among them. They were in this together, all of them. She wasn't alone. A few moments later, a figure emerged from the building, Dean Sullivan. His face was inscrutable as he approached the podium where Layla stood. He didn't look angry, but there was a heaviness in his eyes. "I've heard your voices," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "And I've heard your concerns. But the question remains, is the platform truly in the best interests of Harvard University?" Layla stepped forward. "The platform is about bringing a different perspective to a university that has spent centuries catering to the same demographic. It's about giving students like me the chance to stand up and speak our truth." Dean Sullivan nodded. "I understand your point, Ms. Williams. And while there are still many concerns about the platform, I believe it has sparked necessary dialogue. We may not have all the answers today, but we will continue to work with you to make this university more inclusive. For now, your platform will remain active, but we ask that you work with us to address some of the concerns raised. Layla's heart skipped a beat. The platform wouldn't be shut down. Not yet. There was still hope. As the crowd erupted into cheers, Layla felt tears well up in her eyes. It wasn't the complete victory she had dreamed of, but it was a step in the right direction. She had won. She had made them listen. And for the first time in her life, she knew that her voice mattered. The days that followed the decision were a blur. The campus, once divided, was now alive with a sense of cautious optimism. The administration had agreed to keep the platform active, but with caveats. Layla was to work with a committee to address the concerns of those who felt the platform was too divisive. The victory was sweet, but the battle wasn't over. As Layla walked across the campus the day after the announcement, she felt like a different person. She had come into this fight as a student frustrated by the systemic issues around her, but now, she felt like something more. She had become a symbol, of resistance, of change, of the power of speaking up. And while she didn't want that kind of attention, she couldn't ignore the way it felt when people started to notice her, when they recognized her as the woman who had fought for something bigger than herself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from Tasha. Tasha, how are you holding up? The campus seems different today, huh? Layla smiled softly and typed back. Layla, it does. I don't know if it's good or bad yet, but it's different. I think the hard part's just starting. Tasha's reply came almost immediately. Tasha, you're not alone. And you've already changed things. No matter what happens next, we're all with you. Layla couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. Tasha had been by her side through every twist and turn of this journey. She had made Layla believe that change was possible, even when it felt like the odds were against them. As Layla moved through the campus, she was met with mixed reactions. Some students waved at her, offering words of support. Others, particularly those who had been critical of the platform, gave her cold stares as they passed. Layla didn't mind the stares. They were a reminder that this wasn't a one-sided issue. People would either choose to stand with her or stand against her, but that wasn't her concern anymore. She arrived at the student union, where the first official meeting with the committee was scheduled to take place. The committee was composed of a few faculty members, as well as student representatives from various organizations on campus. Layla wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't back down. As she entered the meeting room, she was greeted by a few nods and uncomfortable glances. The tension was palpable. The committee had been tasked with finding a middle ground, something that could make both sides happy. But Layla wasn't interested in middle ground. She wanted justice, real change. Dean Sullivan was sitting at the head of the table, his usual impassive expression on his face. Beside him was Dr. Andrews, who gave Layla a reassuring smile as she took a seat. The room grew quiet as the meeting began, the weight of the situation settling in. Ms. Williams, Dean Sullivan began, his voice steady, "We are here to discuss the future of your platform. The administration has decided to keep it active for now, but there are concerns that need to be addressed. We need to find a way to move forward that benefits everyone on campus." Layla nodded, her fingers tightening around the pen in her hand. "I understand. But I need to make one thing clear from the beginning: I'm not here to compromise on the values of this platform. It was created to give voice to those who have been marginalized. It's about equity, visibility, and representation." Dean Sullivan's lips tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Instead, he turned to one of the faculty members, Professor Harding, who was seated across from Layla. "Professor Harding, could you elaborate on your concerns?" Dean Sullivan asked. Professor Harding, a middle-aged man with graying hair and glasses perched on the edge of his nose, cleared his throat. My concern is that the platform is creating a sense of division on this campus. I understand the need for visibility, but I worry that by highlighting certain voices, we are isolating others. This could make it harder for the university to foster a sense of community. Layla tilted her head, considering his words. I understand what you're saying. But I think you're missing the point. The division was already there, it's just been ignored. The platform isn't dividing us. It's showing the divides that already exist. It's giving people who have been pushed to the margins a chance to be seen. We can't ignore that anymore. A few students in the room nodded, whispering to each other in agreement. Layla could see that the support was there, at least among her peers. But it wasn't enough. She needed the faculty members to understand. She needed them to see the bigger picture. I don't want to create conflict, Layla continued, her voice firm. But the truth is that for too long, the voices of people like me, Black, Latino, Asian, working-class students, have been ignored. And that silence is violence. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equity. There was a long pause, and for a moment, the room was still. Even Dean Sullivan seemed to be considering her words. I think we can agree that this university needs to make more room for diverse voices, Dr. Andrews said, breaking the silence. But we also need to be mindful of the way these conversations are framed. We need to ensure that the platform remains open to all students, not just those who feel disenfranchised. We can't create an environment where some students feel left out. Layla's heart beat faster as she listened to Dr. Andrews. She could feel the weight of her words, but she also knew that this was the moment to dig in her heels. I agree that all voices should be heard, Layla said. But the fact is, the voices that have been heard for years are those of the privileged. The ones who have been in power. What I'm asking for is for the silenced voices to be given the same attention, the same weight. Until that happens, I won't stop fighting. The room was quiet again. Layla could see that the committee members were processing her words. Some of them looked uneasy, but others seemed to be nodding along. For the first time in a long while, Layla felt like she was being taken seriously. Dean Sullivan spoke again, his tone slightly softer. You make a compelling argument, Ms. Williams. We'll take these points into consideration. But we ask that you work with us to create a dialogue that includes all perspectives. The administration wants to support you, but we need to ensure that this process is constructive, not divisive. Layla took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the conversation lift just a little. It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but it was progress. I'm willing to work with you, Layla said, her voice steady. But I won't compromise on the core values of the platform. I hope you'll understand that. Dean Sullivan nodded slowly. Understood. The meeting adjourned shortly after, but Layla walked out of the room feeling a sense of quiet triumph. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But today, she had stood her ground. And that was a victory in itself. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, emails, and late nights spent preparing for the next steps. Layla was no stranger to hard work, but this was different. The pressure was mounting, and with each passing day, she felt the weight of the expectations on her shoulders. She had started this fight for herself and the people like her, but now, it felt like she was carrying the burden of an entire movement. The committee had formed, and though they had agreed to allow the platform to continue, there were constant discussions about how to balance the various voices on campus. Layla's peers were still enthusiastic, and there was a growing sense of solidarity among them, but the administration was moving slowly, cautiously. They wanted results without causing more unrest. Layla could sense the tension in the air every time she entered a meeting. There were moments when she felt like they were listening, truly listening, but then the next meeting would remind her that progress was slow and not guaranteed. The committee members, though mostly sympathetic, were more concerned with ensuring the platform didn't upset the status quo. They wanted change, but they wanted it on their terms. It was during one of these meetings that Layla found herself facing her most difficult decision yet. The meeting room was large, with walls lined with portraits of former deans and influential figures in the university's history. The air inside felt heavy, as if the weight of centuries of tradition were pressing down on them. Layla sat at one end of the long table, surrounded by faculty members, a few students, and administrators. At the head of the table, Dean Sullivan sat, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Ms. Williams," Dean Sullivan began, breaking the silence. "We have reviewed the concerns raised by the broader student body. Some have expressed that the platform, while important, may be encouraging divisiveness. Others argue that it's created a polarized environment." Layla straightened in her chair. "What do you mean by polarized?" she asked. "The platform is simply giving people the opportunity to be heard. If someone feels uncomfortable hearing the truth, that's on them, not us." Dean Sullivan raised an eyebrow, his tone neutral. "It's more complicated than that, Ms. Williams. The platform has undoubtedly brought attention to important issues, but some students have felt excluded. There is a push from certain groups who believe that it is creating a rift between different cultural and social identities." Layla's pulse quickened. She knew this was coming. The administration had always wanted to control the narrative, to dictate how things should unfold. But this time, she wouldn't let them. "I'm not asking for a platform for just one group of people," Layla said firmly. "I'm asking for a space where everyone who has been silenced can finally have a voice. The issues we're addressing aren't just issues, they're people's lives. And I won't stand by while we water down the message to make people more comfortable." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Layla's eyes locked with Dean Sullivan's, and she could feel the tension between them, the conflict that had been building for weeks. She knew that if she backed down now, it would be the end of everything she had fought for. After a long pause, Dr. Andrews spoke up. "What we need to understand here is that this platform is not about creating division, it's about creating dialogue. This university has long been a place where the voices of the privileged have been heard, but now it's time for those who have been overlooked to speak." Layla nodded, appreciating Dr. Andrews' support, but she knew the battle wasn't over. The room was filled with so many competing interests. Some faculty members wanted to support the platform, but only if it didn't upset the delicate balance of the campus's social structure. Others were skeptical, seeing it as a disruption to the peace they had worked so hard to maintain. "I understand the concerns," Layla said, her voice steady. "But these concerns are not more important than the lives of the students who have been overlooked for so long. You can't pretend that everything is fine when there are students on this campus who feel invisible, who feel that their voices don't matter." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Layla felt her heart beat faster, her emotions rising to the surface. She had come so far, and yet it felt like they were still asking her to choose between progress and peace. Finally, Dean Sullivan spoke again, his voice softer this time. "We're not asking you to back down, Ms. Williams. What we're asking is for you to work with us, to find a way to bring these different perspectives together." Layla looked around the room, at the people who were supposed to help guide her. Some of them seemed genuinely concerned, others were just going through the motions. She realized that this wasn't just about the platform anymore, it was about the power dynamics at play, about who held the keys to the conversation and who was allowed to participate. "I'm willing to work with you," Layla said slowly, "but only on the condition that you don't dilute the message. This is not about compromise. It's about justice. It's about making sure that every student on this campus feels that they belong, that their voice matters." For a moment, it seemed like the committee wasn't sure how to respond. Then, Dean Sullivan leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Layla. "We will take this under consideration," he said, his tone measured. "You've made your point. We will reconvene next week to discuss the way forward." Layla felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination wash over her. The battle was far from over. The committee had heard her, but it wasn't enough. She had to keep pushing, keep fighting for the future she believed in. As the meeting adjourned, Layla walked out of the room, her mind racing. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. The platform was her fight, and she wouldn't let anyone take it from her. Later that evening, Layla sat in her dorm room, reflecting on the meeting. She opened her laptop and saw a flood of messages from students, some offering support, others challenging her stance. But one message stood out. It was from Tasha. Tasha. You're doing something that matters. I know it's tough, but we're all behind you. Don't let them wear you down. Layla smiled at the message. She wasn't alone. And with every step she took, she was getting closer to making the change she knew was possible. Tomorrow would be another day, another challenge. But for tonight, Layla allowed herself a moment of peace. The fight wasn't over, but it was only just beginning. The weeks after that pivotal meeting felt like a roller coaster. Each day was a mix of frustration, moments of hope, and unexpected breakthroughs. Layla couldn't escape the pressure. It was everywhere, on campus, in her inbox, on her phone. People were still talking about the platform, about the protests, about the fight for change. And for better or worse, Layla was at the center of it all. Her dorm room, once a quiet place of solitude, now buzzed with activity. Tasha, once just a close friend, had become her unofficial campaign manager. She kept track of every student petition, every conversation with faculty members, every potential ally. They had a mission now, to ensure that the platform would not only survive but thrive, and that the voices of marginalized students would never be silenced again. One afternoon, as Layla sat in the student union, scrolling through her phone, she noticed a familiar face walking toward her. It was Maya, one of the student leaders who had been vocal in her opposition to the platform. Maya had always seemed like a force of nature, assertive, smart, and unafraid to speak her mind. Layla had expected that their differences would keep them at odds forever. But as Maya approached, there was something different in her eyes. Something less confrontational. "Hey, Layla," Maya said, taking a seat across from her without waiting for an invitation. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Layla looked up, surprised. "Maya? What's going on?" Maya hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about what you said in that last meeting. About how the platform isn't about creating division but about giving people a space to speak up. And, honestly, I think I've been looking at it all wrong." Layla furrowed her brow. She didn't know if she should trust what she was hearing. Maya had been one of the fiercest critics of the platform. She had even called Layla's movement a dangerous trend at one point. "What do you mean?" Layla asked cautiously. Maya took a deep breath. "I think I was too focused on how the platform made some people feel uncomfortable, rather than focusing on why it exists in the first place. I don't want to be one of those people who hides behind their privilege and ignores the voices that matter." "You're right. The conversations we've been avoiding on this campus need to happen." Layla was stunned. She had never expected Maya, of all people, to come around. "So, you're saying you're on our side now?" Layla asked, half smiling, half skeptical. Maya nodded, her expression serious. "I wouldn't go that far just yet, but I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to understand. And that's a start, right?" Layla studied her for a moment, wondering if this was some sort of trap. But when she looked into Maya's eyes, she saw sincerity. And that was something Layla hadn't seen from many people in a while. "Okay," Layla said, her voice measured but open. "I appreciate that. And if you want to help, we could really use some allies who aren't afraid to push back against the system. People like you who have a platform and a voice. Together, we could do more." Maya smiled slightly. "I'll see what I can do." The conversation marked a turning point for Layla. If Maya, someone who had been so vehemently opposed to the platform, could see its value, perhaps there was hope for the future. The campus wasn't as divided as it had seemed. Some students just needed to be reminded that the fight wasn't against each other, it was against a system that had long ignored the voices of the marginalized. That night, as Layla prepared for another committee meeting, she couldn't shake the feeling that change was on the horizon. But the closer she got to the meeting, the more she felt the familiar weight of uncertainty. There was a sense that the administration was trying to stall, trying to slow the momentum of the movement. The fear of losing control was palpable. Layla arrived at the meeting room early, as always, needing a few minutes to gather her thoughts before facing the committee. She sat in the same chair, across from the same faces, but today felt different. There was a new energy in the air. The student leaders who had been quiet about the platform were starting to speak out, and even some of the faculty members who had once been neutral were beginning to voice their support. When Dean Sullivan entered the room, he looked more reserved than usual, but Layla noticed a flicker of something in his eyes, a spark of realization. He took his seat at the head of the table and motioned for everyone to begin. "Thank you for joining us again," he said, his voice steady but lacking the usual firmness. "We're here to discuss the progress of the platform, and we have some important updates to share." Layla straightened in her chair, her mind racing. This could be the moment. If the administration decided to take a real stand, it would send a powerful message to the entire campus. If they decided to back down, it could undo everything. Dean Sullivan continued, looking directly at Layla. "After a great deal of consideration, and with input from various student organizations, faculty members, and administration, we've come to a decision. The platform will be integrated into the university's official communication channels. We will also provide funding for outreach and support programs to ensure that voices from marginalized communities are not only heard but actively engaged in ongoing conversations about the future of our campus." Layla's heart skipped a beat. This was what they had been fighting for. This wasn't just a compromise, it was a victory. "We're committed to making this platform a permanent part of the university's efforts to foster inclusivity and social justice," Dean Sullivan added, his voice firm now, as if he had found the resolve he needed. "We understand that this is only the beginning, but it's a start." Layla glanced around the room. There was a sense of quiet satisfaction in the air, but it was tempered with the knowledge that the real work was just beginning. The platform was secure, but now they had to ensure that it truly served the needs of the community it had been created for. As the meeting adjourned, Layla felt a rush of relief flood through her. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much to be done, but this was a huge step forward. The fight was far from over, but they had won a crucial battle. And for the first time in a long time, Layla allowed herself to imagine what a future with real change might look like. It was strange, Layla thought, how something so important could happen and yet still leave her with a deep sense of uncertainty. The victory had been hard-earned, but it felt like the real test was just beginning. The platform was officially integrated into the university's communications, with full backing from the administration, but the future was still unwritten. Layla sat in her dorm room, scrolling through her phone as messages continued to pour in from students, professors, and activists. The fight had sparked something bigger than she'd anticipated. Now, the conversations were flowing, the momentum was undeniable, and there was an undercurrent of excitement, but there was also the unmistakable weight of responsibility. Tasha had become her most trusted confidant during this process. She had been there for every rally, every late-night brainstorming session, and had even stayed up with Layla through some of her darkest moments. The platform, Layla realized, had been more than just a way for students to voice their frustrations. It had been a catalyst for change, not just on campus, but within her own life as well. "You did it," Tasha said one evening as they sat together in the dimly lit common room of their dorm, scrolling through emails and messages from the student body. "You really did it." Layla smiled faintly but her eyes were distant. "It's not over. Not by a long shot. Now we have to make sure this isn't just some temporary change, some token gesture. We have to make it meaningful. We have to make it last." Tasha nodded, her expression serious. "We're not stopping now. We keep pushing. But this is big, Layla. Really big. You've changed the conversation. It was true. They had changed the conversation. The university had promised funding for outreach and support programs aimed at amplifying marginalized voices, and there were ongoing discussions about how the platform could be expanded to include even more diverse perspectives. The very fact that the administration had agreed to include the platform in the university's official framework meant that change was already starting to take root. But as Layla looked back at everything that had led them to this moment, the protests, the long nights of strategizing, the painful moments of doubt, she knew that it wasn't just about the platform. It had always been about something much deeper. The struggle for equity, the fight for recognition, the challenge of tearing down systems of oppression, all had culminated in a single moment of victory, but that moment had only been the first step. The platform was important, but the work that needed to be done was far more expansive. As weeks passed, Layla continued to juggle her academic responsibilities and her leadership role in the movement. The campus was abuzz with the changes, new student groups were forming, new dialogues were emerging, and there was an air of optimism that hadn't existed before. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As the platform gained more traction, the campus began to see even more resistance. Some students, especially those who had once been silent, were now questioning what the platform's success meant for their own positions on campus. Some saw it as a threat to their privilege, others as an opportunity to undermine the progress that had been made. Layla knew that they were on the precipice of something bigger. But she also knew that with power came the inevitable pushback. She'd been warned about this, she had seen it in other movements throughout history. But knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier to face. One afternoon, as she walked across campus, she passed a group of students gathered near a fountain. She overheard snatches of their conversation, a familiar argument, one she had heard many times before. "This platform is dividing us," one student said. "Why do they always have to bring race into it?" "I'm just tired of hearing about it," another student added. "It feels like every issue is about race now. It's exhausting." Layla paused for a moment, wondering how to respond. She had fought for this platform, for this space where voices like hers could finally be heard, but hearing this made her feel the weight of everything all over again. There was so much work still to be done. But instead of confronting them in that moment, Layla chose to keep walking. She knew that change wasn't easy for everyone, and that it took time, sometimes, a lot of time. The conversation would evolve, but she couldn't force it to change overnight. A few days later, the university hosted a campus-wide forum about the platform and its future. It was a chance for students, faculty, and administrators to come together and discuss how the platform had impacted the campus community and what steps would be taken next. Layla had been invited to speak, and despite the exhaustion she had been feeling lately, she knew that this was an important moment. When it was her turn at the podium, Layla stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked out at the sea of faces in the auditorium, some supportive, others skeptical. She felt the weight of the moment, the magnitude of the changes that were taking place, and the responsibility that had been placed on her shoulders. "Thank you all for being here today," Layla began, her voice steady despite the nerves that had threatened to take over. "When we started this movement, we were told that we wouldn't be able to make a difference. That our voices didn't matter. But look at where we are today. This platform exists because we all fought for it. We all showed up when it wasn't easy. And we won." The room fell silent. Layla paused, letting her words settle in. "But," she continued, "this isn't the end. It's only the beginning. We've made progress, yes, but we still have so much work to do. This platform isn't just about amplifying voices, it's about dismantling the systems that have kept those voices silent for far too long. It's about making sure that when we speak, we're not just heard, but that we are listened to. It's about creating a community where everyone can thrive, not just survive." She took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the room shift. "We have to keep pushing. We have to keep fighting for a future where everyone's voice is valued. And that starts with us. Each and every one of us here today. The room erupted into applause. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Layla could feel the power of the moment, the realization that they had come so far, but the journey was far from over. As the applause faded and the forum continued, Layla knew one thing for sure. The fight for equality and justice was never easy, and it would never be finished. But with every step forward, they were creating a future that was bigger, bolder, and more inclusive than they had ever imagined. For the first time in a long time, Layla allowed herself to believe that real change was possible. And as she walked off the stage, she knew that this was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?